Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. You're watching Culturally Determined, and I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade. And my guest today is Farhad Manjoo. Farhad, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I write about technology for the New York Times.
So thanks so much for coming on. I've been reading you since you were back on Slate years ago. Um, so re
Yeah, I
re
think we even did a blogging heads before.
well, I'm really excited to have you on. And the reason I wanted to have you on was you had a story in the Times Magazine over the weekend entitled "Can Facebook Fix Its Own Worst Bug?" That's about fake news on Facebook. So could you tell us a little bit about your article?
Yeah, I spent a long time at Facebook. It was basically since the kind of start of the article and the start of the reporting was essentially last summer when some of these problems started popping up. It wasn't initially about fake news. It was more like how Facebook was adjusting to its role as a huge distributor of news. And over the course of basically the fall, it became more and more about misinformation and propaganda. And what was interesting about it was sort of the shift in, um, in Facebook's attitude toward what was happening on newsfeed. Initially right after the election, I think everyone remembers Mark Zuckerberg did an interview a couple of days after and was extremely dismissive of the idea that Facebook had any role in the election or any negative role in the election. And since then, he has sort of been more open to discussing how newsfeed has affected the news industry, has affected kind of global politics. And what I attempted to do in the article is kind of chart this evolution and also describe what the philosophical difficulties are for Facebook in combating some of these problems.
Hmm. So you interviewed Zuckerberg twice, according to the article, and it seems like there was a change in his perspective about newsfeed, which is people don't know. Newsfeed is basically the main part of Facebook. It's what you see if you load the
Right.
Facebook app or go to Facebook.com. It's the the scroll of news items that you receive on Facebook. Um,
Yeah, it's a stream of updates from your friends and like businesses and other things you follow, and it's one of the most computationally sort of intensive parts of Facebook. Like it's the feed is determined by a lot of factors, and it's like one, it's like the if you think about like the ranking algorithm for Google being like the reason people keep going to Google, like because they show you the stuff you're looking for right on the top of the page. That's kind of what newsfeed is to Facebook. Like the reason Facebook became so popular, the reason people use it, the reason people keep going back is they have figured out a way to kind of serve you what you want in newsfeed, and that's kind of like the secret to newsfeed to Facebook's success.
right. So that's maybe why Facebook has succeeded, where MySpace and Friendster and Google Plus have not succeeded, is because they've gotten very good at showing you what they think you want to
And
see.
Twitter.
Right. So Facebook is much more successful than Twitter. So how do
Right.
you think Zuckerberg has shifted in his views about Facebook's place in, you know, public life and or global life, I suppose?
Yeah. So he insists that it's not just the election that caused him to sort of think about how Facebook is affecting the world. He says that he's been thinking about these ideas for a while, and there's some sort of public record to support this. Like at his speech at the Facebook Developer Conference last year, he made some political statements. Like he talked about we're not about building walls, which was a pretty direct swipe at Trump then. So he has been thinking about some of the ways that Facebook kind of affects the world, but I think that his and the rest of the companies sort of thinking about it like really accelerated after the election, especially with regard to news. Um, the shift the kind of products of the shift are so far small in substance, but they're like the tone is interesting. So they've rolled out things like fact checking in the news feed. So for some small set of items that are like definitively untrue, that have been like shot down by fact checkers, and mostly of the kind that like are what we called fake news right after the election. Things like, stories published by outlets that don't exist really, that are pushing like you can't really fact check them even because they're just like completely false. They're like, the Pope endorses Donald Trump. Like you
Hmm.
can very easily knock those down. So those kinds of stories are being like if you try to share them on newsfeed now, like you get a warning that says this has been disputed. The other things they've done, they're working on some kind of algorithmic change that would lower the ranking of stories that people click on but don't share, which might indicate some kind of misinformation. And then they've also are trying to work more with the news industry at like earlier parts of their product development process. So this is something called the Facebook News project, Facebook Journalism Project, and it involves basically like partnerships with news companies at early stages. So like when they want to create products, one they did recently was instant articles last year, which is like a way for them to host articles. When they do anything that sort of affects the news business, they want to work with news closer. The thing that they seem to not want to do, and the thing that kind of media critics and others say that they should do, is exercise some kind of more firm, like human judgment or editorial sensibility on newsfeed. They do not, for example, like they don't do anything at this point to try to give you like they don't discriminate between news sources. Like they won't decide to show you like a story from the New York Times versus a story from Breitbart because they have no sort of position on that the New York Times is better than Breitbart, that it's a more accurate source of news, for example. Whereas other companies have, like Google, for example, has a whitelist of news sources, and like in its Google News index, like it has certain sites and it won't include other sites. So they won't do that, and so the sort of primary criticism is that they haven't kind of taken a more proactive stance on like deciding what's news and what isn't.
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting things in the article, I thought, is that and Zuckerberg seems very committed to wanting to solve everything from a algorithm or like computer engineering point of view as opposed to a human judgment point of view. And I suppose since Facebook is so huge and it exists in every language, it would be hard to have like a news editor, monitoring everything. But you kind of contrasted Zuckerberg as computer scientist, computer engineer, and Zuckerberg as human, and which one is going to win out? It seems like the engineer looking for the algorithmic answer is going to win out.
Yeah, I mean, so part of this is sort of just like tech company, like the prism of looking at like tech company kind of bias. Like they look for solutions to problems that are in code and that scale, and it's difficult to sort of come up with a way where you could impose human judgment on newsfeed, which is sorting through thousands of posts for each person, and it's also so that's one problem. Like it may not scale. And the other problem is just simply philosophical. Like I think they do not want to get into a position of becoming like arbiters of what is kind of news that's been deemed accurate and news that has been deemed like not good enough for Facebook. I think there's some legitimate worry that they would become seen as like a partisan political organization. They would be, something like not. They wouldn't be seen as a tech company, but more like how people think of the New York Times or Fox News, like a partisan outlet, a media company rather than, a tech company.
Mm-hmm. How do you think? How do you see Facebook changing in the near future? Is it going to basically look the same, or do you see? It seems like they really are kind of committed to the current model and are just kind of tinkering with around the margins. Is that where you think things are going to
go? No, actually, I think what's interesting about Zuckerberg is I don't. I feel like he is not dogmatic, and if he had sort of firmly held views about this stuff now, he seems um, fundamentally like flexible. Like I think one of the things about you notice over the years, like I've sort of written about the company essentially since it started, and there were a lot of positions that they took that they easily and quickly abandoned in the face of controversy or just like figuring out a better way to do things. And I think if they can figure out a way that scales to improve the accuracy or the integrity or sort of any of the other things we criticize about newsfeed, they can figure out a way to do that. I think they will. One of the things like their long history of kind of being privacy violators is interesting. Like they were very quick to unveil functions in Facebook that made it less private, that got people kind of riled up, and were investigated by the FTC and others for it. And at some point, they became like a mature company and decided to not act that way.
Mhm.
They, now when they release products, they like go through extensive privacy reviews at first. They figured out a way to kind of incorporate privacy into like the very early parts of product development, and like it's become like a core principle of the company. And I think that could happen for things like newsfeed and other parts of Facebook that people criticize. I think they could and may, if Zuckerberg decides that it's important, like they could figure out a way to change it. So I think it's an interesting time for Facebook because I don't think that it's going to look the same and work the same for a while. Like one of the things I took away from talking to him is that he takes these issues seriously, and I think he understands that like it's going to be like Facebook is big enough now that people are going to blame it for like world historical problems, and he worries about that image and worries, and I think genuinely worries about its effects on the world, and sort of wants it to be a force for good in the world. Like I think it's easy to be like it's very easy, and I sometimes am like cynical about tech companies, but I think that sort of generally like he wants Facebook to be a force for good and like would work for that. I think although the kind of countervailing forces, they're in the tech industry, they have to move fast, and they often do things. They often sort of unveil products and launch products without completely thinking through the consequences of them, and they don't yet have the sort of muscle to anticipate sort of the worst uses of their products before they're out.
Uh-huh. So speaking of new products, the main thing that Zuckerberg introduced, I guess at the Facebook Developers Conference recently, was this virtual reality system where you
Yeah.
could, well, you can describe it better than me, but it struck me as being so unnecessary and not like something that would ever really work. But what do I know? How did this? Can you describe what this is and tell me what you think of it?
Yeah, so they are launching, they're sort of diving into what's called augmented reality, where um, when you use the Facebook camera to take selfies or launch live video or otherwise sort of interact with people, you can add various kinds of like digital objects, like the examples they showed off were, you take a video of yourself eating a bowl of cereal, and like you can like have like dolphins and rainbows around your bowl of cereal, and it sounds silly. I mean, in many cases it is silly, but it's a super popular thing. And Snapchat has done it a lot,
Uh-huh.
and it's been popular. Um, and it's also sort of like a computationally like interesting thing to like meld digital video with live video. I think they're interested in it from a technology standpoint, and so I think they think it's going to be a big thing. They're diving fully into it. Um, you can sort of the potential like problems with this are like kind of obvious. Like you think about them in like the first 3 minutes after listening about the product. Like you could put fake stuff in a video, and it would be difficult to figure out. Computers are getting good enough that it will be at some point difficult to figure out if what you're watching on Facebook is is real, or is sort of some part of it is like digital fake news.
Mhm.
And um, and it's interesting that like that has not come up in the discussion. That was sort of not part of the announcement, or in the like pre in a pre in the like sort of run up in the stories that they did with news outlets about the product. Like it reminded me of last year when they launched Facebook Live, which is their live video service. They sort of talked up the very positive sides of like live video. It's been used in protests and in the police shooting in Dallas last year. Like it was used to sort of document that incident. But it's also been used in a series of assaults and like murders and suicides, some terrorist acts. And today they announced that they were going to hire 3,000 more contract reviewers to look at the stuff to make sure that terrible things didn't go on in live. Just a
Yeah.
year after they launched it, which is, like, what were they doing? I think it's sort of a sign of like how they rush into some of these things, sometimes without fully, thinking about the consequences.
Yeah, I joked on Twitter that that was the world's worst job, trying to find the, objectionable videos, the Facebook streams. It is interesting though when you think about what we are discussing earlier with trying to find an engineering or algorithmic solution to everything, that now they are bringing in actual humans to try to review this. I think because they caught so much bad press because of this tragic case of the guy who murdered a random person on Facebook Live.
Yeah, I mean, it's although the way they're doing it is so they are going to have a total of like I think 7,000 people now looking at these videos, but they have millions and millions of videos, and so the way they do it is it's sort of they use algorithms and they use people flagging to decide to triage the whole system and decide figure out which videos to look at. So it's a very algorithmic solution at the moment. It's also sort of very similar to what other companies do. It's how YouTube works, for example. So it's not a very novel solution, and it's which it makes it all the more surprising that they have human reviewers, but they've had human reviewers, but they only decided to expand the program now is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Zuckerberg himself has been doing some weird stuff lately. He visited, I believe, an Iowa farm family and had dinner with them and was photographed doing that.
Yeah,
Things which make people speculate that maybe he wants to enter politics. And now that we have Trump as president, it seems to have kind of lowered the bar for speculation about any prominent person in America running for president. Do you think he
right.
has political ambitions?
He said no, like we asked him, and he said he was very he he wanted in part to use the interview to shoot down that rumor. He's very sort of forceful about it. He like rolled his eyes and laughed about the idea. And everyone I talked to who knows him sort of supported that view. Like he's not generally interested in politics, especially in national politics. Like I think he thinks about the world in a much sort of larger and longer term time scale. If you look at his sort of philanthropic initiatives, they're like curing all disease. They're like long-term, huge, like world-changing things. And I think that he thinks about sort of American politics as being not less important, but like it's not as big an interest for him. So I believe that he, at this point, is not interested in running for president. So what's this tour for? I mean, he is. I think this is out of the impulse of him, wanting. So I think some part of it is like PR, right? Like he wants to show that he like cares and is listening to people. He's also, the leader of a community of 2 billion people, and people use his service like for many hours each day, and he wants to figure out some way to stay in touch with those people. Like he has been doing this on his Facebook page for a long time, like interacting with people, and now he's kind of doing it in the real world. And I think he also is just like a quixotic person. Like he does strange things. Like a couple years ago, his annual project was to only he only ate meat that he had personally killed. He last year worked on like an artificial intelligence service for his house. One year, his challenge was to learn Mandarin. So he, every year he does a kind of a unusual thing, and going to every state and like visiting people doesn't seem to me like it does seem like a political act, but he has become in some way a political actor.
Hmm.
I don't think it necessarily means that he wants to run for president.
Hmm. Does I can't decide whether Zuckerberg is someone who basically just got lucky by having an idea that was ripe to flourish at the right moment, or is kind of like a Steve Jobs type visionary. Part of this is influenced by the fact that I was had the opportunity to be a very early adopter of Facebook and turned it down because I knew someone who uh, went to Harvard who, when they first emailed out trying to get other people who went to other colleges to join Facebook, I got that email message and immediately said, "This is stupid. Um, I don't need to look at this anymore." So I didn't see it.
Uh,
I didn't see it coming. But how is Zuckerberg a visionary type person, or did he just kind of strike oil?
no, I don't think he struck oil. I think he's super smart and like um, I don't know if he's not. I don't think he is the kind of like inventor of things that Steve Jobs is. But he is, I think he's more similar to Bill Gates in that he's very good at running a big company and figuring out sort of the right um, business and sort of like product offering that that company should have. And he's also very good at like um, running that company at scale, like uh, making sure that company's products are distributed and like doing the kinds of things that big businesses need to do. Um, and like he's also extremely competitive. And um, I talked to someone who said that, like someone very smart who worked with him for a long time, who said that he is the sort of the quickest learner that he has ever met. Like he will devour books and like figure out whatever he needs to know about certain subjects, and you can tell that in his long manifesto. Like he sort of has read a lot recently about um, like the society of human history, like the history of human society, and like anthropology, and sort of various kinds of ways that humans connect. And like he's interested in stuff that like when he decides to like learn about things, he like dives fully in. Um, so I don't think he got lucky. Like there's sort of a lot of people in tech, and one of the things I've noticed that like he is um, one of the people who has sort of seemed to have grow into his role as a CEO and a leader in like a much more natural way than others have. Like
Hmm.
if you watch very early appearances that he made and stuff, he was very like nervous, kind of like nerdy speaker, and he's not that anymore. Like he learned to sort of carry the role of his job like in a public way, and I think he's also sort of done that in how he sort of actually runs the company.
Hmm. Um, only I was thinking about what questions I want to ask you, and only today did I come to realization. I was looking at my phone and I saw the little icon, the little Facebook icon had a number next to it, and I kind of was like, "What is this now?" And I realized that's not like my experience with Facebook is maybe not so positive. If I'm seeing I have some kind of alert, and I'm like, "Well, I have to deal with this now."
Yeah,
Does Facebook just kind of like suck? Like, what is your opinion of Facebook? Are we kind of just like stuck with this? Can it improve? Is it like I contrast it with when I get a Twitter alert, I kind of it gives me a little burst of serotonin or something. But Facebook
yeah.
seems more like a chore at this point. How would you evaluate the site overall?
I think a lot of people think that. So, I mean, the numbers don't really bear that out. Like, people keep spending more time on Facebook and more people keep using it. And so, there's a certain way in which, like, you can talk about like various cultural products and don't understand why they're popular, and like Facebook may be one of them. Like I don't understand why a lot of like popular movies are popular, but they are.
Hmm.
And Facebook could be like that. And like I also think that it doesn't like I use Twitter all the time. I barely use Facebook, and like Twitter serves a very definite like function in my life and my job that Facebook doesn't. On the other hand, I use Instagram all the time, and like Instagram is owned by Facebook. It feels like a social network that is some mix of Twitter and Snapchat and Facebook, like in a way that I appreciate. And so Facebook has like through Instagram fulfill that like function for me. And more than 1 billion people around the world use WhatsApp, which is this messaging service that Facebook owns. So I think that one of the things he smartly did was buy up a bunch of other services that like could fill needs for people. And the way the way he's described this is that, at some point, Facebook, the main Facebook may either mature or like people will use it less or won't find as much from it. But then there's these other sort of services coming along the way that will be, big things in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years. And so he sort of has like a pipeline of social services.
Hmm.
I think of Facebook is like I do understand what you're saying. Like it feels sometimes like a chore, like email in some way. Like
Right.
it's not a great feeling. But I also think that I may just be unusual on that. Like I think a lot of people love it. So
Um, you talk in your piece about how Trump's election was the political event that shook Silicon Valley in a way that other events of the past 15 years, including 9/11, the Iraq War, didn't do. Do you think Silicon Valley is going to change at all? I mean, I kind of was thinking about, eating cereal with a cartoon dolphin next to you. This is not the most important thing that our brightest brains in the world could be, working on
yeah.
in an era of incipient fascism. Um, are things going to shift at all?
So with Facebook specifically, like I think that the um, dolphin cereal bowl thing is like one of, it's like the flashiest thing they're doing, but like it, in as evidence of his interest in sort of making Facebook a more important force in the world or a force for good, he has talked about uh, changing how groups work on Facebook. Like one of the things he said is that he found they did a survey and they found that 100 million people on Facebook are involved in Facebook groups that they describe as like very meaningful in their lives. These are like groups that they check into all the time, and the people on there are like their closest friends or people they interact with, and it's sort of become a big part of their lives. So Zuckerberg was reaction to that was like, why is it only 100 million? Like, why? It's a small number of Facebook users relatively. So his charge to his team was that instead of looking at from now on their sort of metric for success is not going to be the total number of people who use Facebook groups, but the total number of people who find Facebook groups meaningful, and he wants to like change the product to make that part, that number increase. And I thought that was super interesting. Like, I don't normally see a tech company looking at metrics that are not like sheer number of users or like of engagement. Like it's interesting. I thought that he likened these groups to like church groups or other kind of civic groups which people used to interact with in the real world. And this is the whole like bowling alone theory. Like we don't like interact with other people, and he wants to make Facebook that place. Now, obviously you could criticize that. You could say we should not meet through Facebook. We should meet in the real world. Like we shouldn't have a corporation like mediate our like most important groups. But I think insofar as he has like the ability to change some real world thing, I think it's interesting that he's working on something that people like. His metric for success is like how meaningful people find it. Other companies in Silicon Valley doing that, I mean, I don't know. Like this, it's like an industry that's part driven by like idealism. Like one of like every stupid tech company that launches like has some ambition to change the world, even if they're launching like some like I don't know like singing light bulb or something.
Right.
So it's like part of it's just part of the standard pitch. Um, but I noticed like that people started talking about politics and started talking about the ways that technology can alter politics and like improve and specifically like make lefty politics like more powerful after the election in a way that like I've never noticed here in Silicon Valley. Like it was part of for even now like for the last few months since the election until now like I rarely have a conversation where people don't talk about sort of like what's going on in the news, which is really unusual for the tech industry. Like even after 9/11, like right after 9/11, like a month after 9/11, Apple went ahead and introduced the iPod. And like it was sort of business as usual. Like it's been business as usual here for a long time. And it's not, I don't think it's like a callousness. There's been a feeling in the tech industry for a long time that what happens in politics sort of doesn't really affect and doesn't really enter into sort of what the tech industry is doing. It's been separated. And they only like grudgingly entered lobbying and other kinds of interests in Washington. And I think after the election, they're sort of much more interested in like what's happening in the world beyond the valley.
Hmm. And I think certainly the resistance protest movement that sprung up has been greatly helped by Facebook and other social media. I mean, I attended a pretty hastily organized protest in my hometown that came about because of the threats that were coming into Jewish community centers, and that was organized, I think, entirely on Facebook. So, you know, it's not, it doesn't just stay online anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe a final question is, like, is Facebook always going to be with us? Is it so big now, and because of network effects, is it going to be here for the foreseeable future, or could some competitor ever arise to challenge Facebook?
Um, I think it's going to be here for the foreseeable future. I mean, yeah, as a company, it certainly is. Like the primary Facebook app may lose some of its engagement and other things, but because like almost everyone who has internet access in the world already uses it, so like growth will slow down, and people will find more time doing other things. I think though that like they have a lot of other properties that people will use instead. Um, and, one of the things that I become more convinced of recently is that the kind of five tech companies that rule the internet. So it's Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. Just like there's no foreseeable way that like maybe one of them could fail, but they are all so deeply embedded in every part of the internet, in many different parts of the internet for each of them, that it's very hard to imagine them being sort of toppled by some kind of startup. It's like Microsoft in the 90s, except these companies aren't going to be pursued by any kind of like antitrust action, at least here in the US. And there are five of them. So there are lots of them, and they sort of own lots of our data and many parts of our digital lives, and they're inescapable collectively. So yeah, I wouldn't bet against Facebook.
Hmm. Well, there's an interesting piece that was appeared in the Times recently about antitrust and the big five companies that
Yeah.
you mentioned. I can't remember who wrote that, but we'll include the link below. And it is interesting to think whether, probably not under Trump. Who knows? Who knows what he's going to do on any given day? But whether the government will go after Google or Amazon to break up a monopoly.
Yeah, I don't. Trump said a lot during the campaign that he would fight Amazon and Apple and others, but it doesn't seem like the very few like the his the appointment that he made in the DOJ on antitrust doesn't seem like anyone who's going to sort of fight the tech companies. His FCC commissioner doesn't seem to be against any of the kind of giant tech companies. So I think it's unlikely.
Okay, well, Farhad, thank you so much for coming on. Blogging Heads and Culture Determined. All of our viewers out there, you can like Blogging Heads on Facebook if you haven't already and get
Yeah,
your content that way. You can also subscribe to the show on iTunes and leave a review if you like it a lot. Thanks so much for coming on, and everyone should go read your article, which we'll link to, which is in the Times Magazine, and the title of that was "Can Facebook Fix Its Own Worst Bug?"
cool. Thanks so much.
Okay, talk to you later.
Bye bye.